right, welcome everybody to the Inner Carnivore podcast, episode 3. I have a special guest with me today, Mimi Morgan. I have followed and interacted with Mimi on Twitter, I guess it's X now, for a little while, and she was one of the first people that I wanted to get on here when I decided to launch this podcast. Before I get into it with Mimi, wherever you are listening, whether it is Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, or watching this on YouTube, do us a huge favor, like, subscribe, comment, share, really helps us out. So getting into it, how are you, Mimi?
Doing great, thank you. Yeah, beautiful day. I'm having a good time.
Good.
Yeah,
So I honestly don't even remember when I first came across you on Twitter. I guess it's X now, but I refuse to call it that.
yeah. Well, good. I'm not going to call it that either. I call it Twitter.
Yeah, it just sounds weird. Uh, and one of the first things that I saw, just diving right into it, is your pinned tweet on Twitter is a before and after
Yeah.
of you, one that I believe is a hospital bed.
I
And
was in rehab, so similar thing, but after I
okay,
was released from the hospital. Yeah.
gotcha. Um, that's the before, and then after you're like jacked and looking like you're 35.
Oh,
And
thank you.
so we've talked a little bit. I listened to one of your podcast episodes, so I have a decent idea of the backstory. Um, my goal here is to just kind of like recap
Okay.
where that is and then start from the point that you started healing and then
Okay.
like go with it from there. So from my understanding is you've always been pretty active. Like, did I hear you were doing like dog sledding and biking around Ireland and
Yeah, I was an accomplished equestrian. I wasn't when I was younger. I was actually very sick and pretty much bedridden with asthma as a child until I discovered horses. And miraculously, and back then it was treated differently. So we were told to rest. We were not to move, not to. So I was exempt from PE. And then I discovered horses and I came alive. And you just couldn't stop me from that point of age 13 on. So yes, accomplished equestrian, dog sledding, backpacking. I have a picture up on Twitter, me carrying a 65-pound backpack at high altitude. And it was weighed. It was with outward bound. So if you were over 65 pounds, you were chucking your change of socks for day 5 out of the bag. And so, yes, I've always been really active. It's always been a huge part. I have an adventuresome spirit.
yeah, for sure.
So, yeah.
What type of equestrian?
When I was younger, I rode saddlebreds. And then as an adult, I had a Dutch warm blood. I rode dressage.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know a ton about it. My sister showed Tennessee Walkers for a while when I
Okay.
was growing up. So I spent time around horses, but never really
Yeah.
got into it myself. Um, Very expensive. Holy cow. Horses are so
Yeah.
expensive.
The upkeep's actually more expensive. They are. And the upkeep and the showing,
Yeah.
very expensive.
So
It's a
you're
great
super
hobby.
active, right? You do all these things that, the average person, I couldn't do that type of hiking or biking. Like my cardio's terrible,
Sure you could.
partly because I hate it. But so you're doing all this stuff. And then if I'm recalling the timeline, you have an accident and you have an injury,
Yeah, so
right?
I broke my wrist really bad, and I pinpoint that as being the catalyst for setting me on the downward spiral. It sounds silly because it's everybody breaks a wrist. I mean, it's pretty common, but that set my body off and set me on the downward spiral pretty quick.
So would you say that it was because you had some complications and you had to, take a step back? Would you say that it was your inability to continue your active lifestyle that started that trend?
Um, no, I think my diet was pretty normal, not high. I've never been a high fat or protein. I've always been a good eater, so I had that going for me. I didn't have to go through a big thing of eliminating junk food or food that wasn't good. So I was a pretty good eater. I was working myself into the ground, and I was not sleeping. And so that added to it. I wasn't riding at the time. I still was walking a couple miles. I wasn't lifting weights. But I clearly wasn't taking care of myself. My health, my well-being was not my priority. And, and my sleep really probably was one of the worst. I was lucky if I got 3 or 4 hours sleep, and I'm working 60, 70 hours a week. And this was in my later 50s. So, and it eventually, I think that caught up to me.
So what
And
was the next step after the wrist
after
injury?
the wrist injury, so I developed Dupuytren's, which my body started going haywire, creating a lot of collagen in my hand. Was about to lose the use of my hand. Did a alternative therapy, which I talked about in there. I won't go in again, but it was radiation for a series of weeks, and that stopped it, and I've been free. And then around that time, I started to have neck trouble. I started to notice when I got up, I couldn't stand on my feet. That was new. And the radiologist at the time, physician who was mapping me for that, noticed it and sent me to a rheumatologist, and that's where I was diagnosed with RA. And then shortly after that, 2 years later, I started to have neuro problems. In part, one of the medications I'm allergic to. Started to find myself on a street I walked a gazillion times, literally. I didn't know where I was. I'd have hallucinations. I'd be disoriented. And at first they thought it was seizures, and then my kids noticed masking in my face, other movement, stiffness, could swing my arm, a number of other things. And 2 years after the RA diagnosis, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease by not one, but 3 of the top centers in the U.S.
So I have a little bit of personal. Good.
No, you go.
I have a little bit of personal experience. My grandma died of a rare form of Parkinson's, and so somebody that's seen that firsthand. Like I was younger, for most of that I was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So not somebody that can process what's happening really, but I definitely saw like the degradation of her condition, right? It went from not really moving around much to then a walker, then a wheelchair, then bedridden, and it was a long drawn out process.
Yeah.
And there was no getting better. So not pretending like I don't know kind of the rest of the story, like that in and of itself is like, whoa, like how does this happen? Because that's not something that you just get better from. Like that's not a disease.
No, there's
right?
no cure. There is no cure. There's only medicine to mask the symptoms. There's no cure. Actually, interesting enough, that and every of the 3 centers that I went to all said the same thing, and they put me on levodopa, and I responded pretty well to it, and that's a pretty good sign that that's what you have. There's no definitive test, and actually 25% of the people that are diagnosed with it will, within 5 to 10 years, have that diagnosis taken away. So it's pretty hard. It's really clinical. And they all said the number one thing that you can do for yourself before you take your pills is this high intensity exercise. That's your only chance of slowing it down, if you will, which is pretty interesting.
Right. Yeah.
That is. But yeah, I'm devastated at this point. It really, it hit me hard. I did rock steady boxing, which was good. But it was hard to be with other people that were more advanced from me, because I'm looking at them thinking, this is where I'm going to be.
Yeah.
This is, if I'm coming in at year 1 with Parkinson's and they're year 3 and they can barely talk and move around. And I did the speech therapy because I had speech, I had a voice tremor. I mean, I was getting hit. My autonomic system was getting hit, which is why they thought I had one of the rare Parkinson's too. And for the first 5 years, I had that was a suspect. But yeah, it was pretty devastating. And I like to say that I took it really well, but I didn't.
Yeah. So how long after the Parkinson's diagnosis did you have the stroke?
So we were in, I would say that it would be the 3rd year. And I actually had a good day that day. One of the things that I'll just back up real quick that made things worse is the medicine makes you nauseous, and I had a lot of trouble with having off symptoms, which means that in between my medications, I was going back to somebody who had no medication, and I'm still working. So I'm taking medication every 3.5, 4 hours, and it can make you really ill until you get leveled up, which can take a year. So my diet is basically consisting of graham crackers, saltines, and bananas, uh, which is, you're smiling. It's like, oh, wow, I could see where this
Well,
is going.
I believe you mentioned that you have to eat very low protein and high carb with
Yes,
the medication you were taking because they
yeah,
compete against each other.
they do. I'm getting to the brain. So now I can get a little fistful of chicken or uh, fish at night, but no fat, basically a salad in the day. I mean, very protein of negligence. And then now I'm trying to work, and the medicine can make you dizzy and really nauseous. And the only thing that I could help stop that were the saltines, graham crackers, and bananas. So now I'm getting sicker
Yeah.
for that. And so it was about, so I had a great day, and I had the stroke. It was February 7th. I had actually walked 4 miles by accident, had dropped actually these ears. My son-in-law had bought me those, and I came back and realized I had dropped one. And, of course, I dropped it at the mile mark. So now I've walked 4 miles. I actually had a great day and sat on the bench. It was a warm February, and that's where I had the stroke.
So typically you'd be like, okay, now we're at like rock bottom, right? But
What
then
do
you
you
had an
think?
infection after that,
Yeah.
and like I think that story is listening to that part of the story um, is honestly I feel like that's modern medicine in a nutshell, right? Because
Mm,
they basically come back and say, okay, you're allergic to antibiotics, some of these antibiotics,
right.
and you have MRSA,
Yeah. Yeah.
which for people that don't know, MRSA is methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus,
Yeah.
which is a staph bacteria that has, become immune to methicillin, which methicillin was created because penicillinase became resistant to penicillin. And so it's
Mm,
like, you start with, penicillin back in the 20s, where it's like this godsend antibiotic, which it did, like penicillin's helped probably millions of people. But then it's led to all of these issues with now these new mutated bacteria and diseases, which are causing more and more problems. So I believe you said on the podcast interview that you were on 5 different antibiotics.
at least. And so I got the infection from an IV. And the second time I was back, yes, they put me on. I actually passed out. My daughter called me. It was 3 days after the stroke was when it appeared, and so they put me on the typical antibiotic for it. It came in the blood cultures as just typical Staph A, and they did that course, but I wasn't getting better, and they put me on 2 additional antibiotics. I kept complaining about my back. They kept looking at my heart, where when it's bloodborne, it wants to go to usually it goes to your heart first, your spine. There's maybe your lungs is the second one. I forget, but I know they were worried about the heart. I kept complaining about my back. They kept saying it was because I was lying in bed, for a couple of days. I was actually immobile for the stroke because I had gotten TPA and they can't rest falling. But so, yeah, so finally, day 5, the cultures are coming back positive, which is not good. Now it's really raging through my body. And they added 2 other antibiotics. I started to get better. Then they sent me home with a PICC line, which is a line that goes to your chest and you carry antibiotics. I had to do it for 30 days. But unbeknownst to me and my family, the additional 2 antibiotics, they took me off of them and sent me home with the one that wasn't working in the very first place. And 2 weeks later, I ended up back in the hospital for a third time now. Actually, my temperature dropped. I was starting to become hypothermic. I was kind of really unaware what was going on, but my family came to check on me. It was my first night alone after the second visit. And I couldn't, I went to go take a step and I couldn't. And actually that day I'd walked a mile with a walker. I'm like, I thought I made the stroke. I'm going to try to get through this. And so I walked a mile, but it was about to get really bad now.
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons I love you on Twitter, like because this is your personality, right? This is
Yeah.
who you are. It's like I'm going to like do whatever I can. If I'm going to walk a mile in a walker, that's that's amazing. And so like you have all these complications, you get these diagnoses, I mean, for all intents and purposes, like this is I don't want to use the term like death sentence, but this is like, okay, now
Yeah.
we're going down a path that not many people come off of.
No, and that's exactly what they told me. For one, I had emergency surgery, and none of the doctors wanted to operate because, I'm loaded with this in my spine. I have it in my spinal canal. If they rupture it during the surgery, and it goes to my brain, I'm dead. I'm dead there on the operating table, and nobody wanted to touch me. So they had to it took probably 12 hours. They had to convince the doctor by letting him believe it was his idea. You know how that goes. And it was the hospital list and the infectious disease, which I had a connection to, which I shared. And they had to convince them. So finally, around 1 o'clock in the morning, they did with surgical debridement. But uh, I had a slim, maybe a 40%, 50% chance of surviving it. Because at this point, it's seated in my body. It's in my muscles. It's eaten my spine. It's in my canal, which they're not going to operate on. And the only they could do would be to hose me out with antibiotics was my only chance of living, really, at this point. Otherwise, they're not going to kill it. And so, yeah, I wasn't aware at the time because I was really too sick. I was starting to become septic. I heard this after the fact with my family and everybody had gotten on the phone to let me know they love me because I might not have gotten through. And also might have not, I was told when I was released that I had a really good chance of it coming back, at least 50. And if it comes back, you just don't. At my age and where it was, you just don't come back.
Yeah.
You don't get through that again.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So how long from then? So I want to talk about this doctor's appointment that you
Yeah.
had a little bit later. How long between that bout where they had the surgery and when you made this decision to go talk to this doctor, and then we'll dive into that part.
So that was actually a couple of years because I was now in the hospital because I had complications. So I was in the hospital for another 6 weeks. Then I went to rehab for 3. So I didn't get out of the hospital and rehab, say, from February 7th to almost the end of April.
Okay.
That I was in. And I was assigned physical therapy, and I did that for about 15 months, and I couldn't get far, Jason. A walker, cane, pretty immobile, could barely do 5 steps up to the room. I had now moved into where my daughter and her husband, their home, in a wing, and they traveled a lot, so I was home a lot. I had home health care. Had to sit to wash my hair. I mean, I just couldn't move. It was really bad. So 15 months, I go see my orthopedic, and he sort of like, this is it. Your spine's fused. There's nothing else. So I was released from physical therapy, and really at this point had given up. And that was pretty much in January. Then February, I had my epiphany with a mailbox where I was ready to quit and stopped and asked myself the 10 steps. And gave it 10 steps. And I'd say a month in there that I went to go see. He's actually a chiropractor. And I went to go see him probably about 6 weeks later, realizing of course, I'm still on high carb because I'm still diagnosed with Parkinson's. Now I'm not moving. And when I say I'm not moving, I could barely walk from one end of the room to the other. I mean, I'm really not moving. And I thought, well, I've got to lose some weight and I need to do it fast. I'm just not going to be able to get this with my back. I was also probably pain level 6, no pain meds, relentless spasms. And then, so I saw him in April. And that was 3 years ago this past April. So it was almost, I was released from the hospital, and it was a good year and a half before I got to him. So I'm
So you
still
had
going
this,
down. I'm going downhill that year and a half.
yeah. So you have this essentially multi-year issues and complications and
Yeah,
diagnoses. And I mean, at that point, to me, that doesn't sound like living. That sounds like you're just surviving, right?
barely.
So
Yeah.
what, so I believe in the podcast you basically went to go find a weight loss drug,
Yeah.
correct?
I mean, I'm on 13 plus medications. At this point, I'm not even thinking, well, what's one more? Like, still haven't, nothing's registered yet. I just knew I needed to lose weight so that I could walk, so I could go to the grocery store, so I could just do a few, so I could stay. I know that sounds silly, but not having to sit in a chair to wash your hair and shower for somebody who's done dog sledding riding was really just crushing. I couldn't walk without a cane. At this point, I'd gotten rid of the walker, but a cane. I couldn't wear heels, and that sounds silly and it's not important, but it was important to me as a woman. So I just wanted to be able to walk, just to walk again. So basically, it was weight loss. I thought I was going in for that. I was going to get my prescription and walk out.
Yeah. And what, for the people who don't know the story, what did he tell you?
So he spends about an hour, and he probably spent 2 hours with me. Half hour was going through all my medications. I brought a bag of it all in, and God bless him, because most would just run away from even thinking about something like this. And we went over what I ate, and he started to talk to me about eating, fat and protein. And I looked at him and I said, "Are you nuts? I'm trying to lose weight." And he asked me to. I was like, "There's like no way." And he said, "Will you trust me?" And I really, we had a nice connection. He himself had been really sick, and he had recovered, and he shared some of that with me. So I was a little bit, okay, this guy's not selling me something. And so I proceeded with the 50% fat, 25 protein, 25 carbs is what we started with. I started to feel better within a month, a little bit, like just not so weighed down and sickly, just a touch more energy. And we started to fool around with that a little bit more, and I started to get more towards the ketosis. And because I think 25% for me, maybe it was more than 50 grams of carbs still. And I started to, just by accident, because not knowing, how many grams of fat, I hadn't eaten fat, I hadn't eaten protein at all. I'm still on the Parkinson's medicine, and they're saying you can't do this. So I know I'm taking a risk. But I started to notice when I got up to 70, 80% fat, my neuro symptoms got better and a light went off in my head.
The moment where you're like, wow,
Yeah.
like diet might actually be a key factor in this
Yes.
scenario.
And also, whoa, you are fat starved.
So where did you go from there? So this light goes off.
Um, I just kept going with it. And I kept getting stronger, and I started to get back up my walk up to 2 miles. And incidentally, for a year and a half, I couldn't get past a quarter of a mile. And now, with changing my diet and my 10 steps, so every day I get to the new marker, 10 steps, which is really basically walking across a room. I would do that every day, and before I knew it, in a year I'd gotten 2 miles. you know think about that. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I couldn't get past a quarter mile for a year and a half using every bit of resolve I had. I just couldn't. And, I just kept, so I started to get rid of medicine. So the heartburn left. So I started to get rid of that. Started to get rid of a whole other medications. And then it was and was really feeling good, really strong. And then last year was when I knew I needed to weight train. I had borderline osteoporosis that scared the daylights. They wanted to put me on medication. I said, no, I'm not doing it. And I started weight training last April. And that's been huge because my muscles were still, even though eating the fat and the protein, my muscles were wasting. I was pretty weak, pretty frail. And that's huge, even over the walking. And I love my walking. I happen to like cardio if it's outdoors.
Hmm.
But that was huge, working with a trainer, and we've gone very slow. She's an older woman. And I trust her. And then it was last summer that I started to fool around. I started fooling around with, thinking, maybe I don't have Parkinson's. So I started to fool around with my medication. I was on 1,200 milligrams of levodopa. And that is a huge amount. You usually are not on that high a dose until you're, 8, 9 years. Every 3.5 hours, I'm taking those pills just to power through the next 3 hours. And I started fooling around with it, about 20, 25 milligrams a couple times a day. And I would take it before I get out of bed and not get out of bed until it kicked in, and take it and I started fooling around with it because I noticed my neuro symptoms were going pretty quick when I would stay to high fat. And I got off of it last summer.
That's amazing. How
Oh,
did that process go? Did you just decide on your own that you were not going to do it? Was it a conversation with your doctor? Because I think so many people are on medications. Like my father was on statins for almost 20 years because
oh,
he
wow,
had an
yeah,
incident, and he finally found a doctor that was like, you know what, I think we're having some side effects of this, so we're going to try to work off of this. But a lot of people are scared to have that conversation. Like,
yeah,
doctor says, hey, you need to do this, right? In your case, hey, you have Parkinson's, you need to take this
yeah,
medication or it's going to get, you know, way worse.
right.
Was it something you did on your own, or did you have that conversation with your doctor and said, hey, I want to stop this?
No, I did on my own with all of mine, including I was to be on antibiotics for life. So 3.5 years taking antibiotics was my last medication to get off of last summer. And I knew I had to get off. I knew it was just going to destroy me because I ended up being on at least, so the last antibiotic before I was in the hospital, just to back up, was the one that is used to, uh, because none of them are working. Not only am I developing severe allergies from, like, I'm in lockdown now and staying for an extra week because I've got no white blood cells. So they put me on I mean, there are a few others, but the one that kills MRSA. And at this point, they're saying you have MRSA because I'm not responding for months. It's not, the antibiotics are not killing the staph. So at this point, they say MRSA. And I knew being on the antibiotics was destroying my gut, my health. And I knew it was going to come back to haunt. I was afraid it would come back to haunt me. Down the road, I get sick. Now there's a whole lot I can't take. And they want me on it for life. And I'm taking high dose Bactrim DS twice a day, and they won't let me off. And I just started fooling around, and I'm not suggesting anybody do this. Doctors saved my life when I was at the hospital, but I always say they didn't heal me. And I made a decision based on what I wanted to do, knowing what the risks were. And I started fooling around with it, and I decided I felt really healthy last summer, and I decided to go off of them. And I went to the doctor, and actually I like him. He's good, and he'll sit and he'll talk with you. The problem is everybody, it was so bad, and everybody's so frightened. They don't want to be the one to kill me, So they just say be on for life. And I said to him, can we talk about this? And he said, it's going to kill you. And it's going to come back in 30 days is usually how it does. And you're going to be back where you were. And I just don't think you're going to make it. It's too much. And I said, well, I'm already off. I've been off for 45 days. And he's like, okay, so you're alive. I mean, he's like, what can I do with you?
Yeah.
And he said, all right, and I still struggle. I still get infections easy because I'm off. I've had more than I care to have this year of just upper respiratory. And so I'm still working on that part, building your immune. MRSA supposedly can destroy half of your immune system. I'm determined to get it back. So I'm still working on that piece of the puzzle. I am able to fight some of them off, which is good, but
I think such a tough situation because I have a decent medical background and I've had a whole host of physical injuries from playing sports. So I've spent my fair share of time either on, anti-inflammatories or having surgeries or whatever it is. And it's such a tough balance. So I do believe that there's a lot of good in modern medicine, right? Like
yeah, I do too.
we're able to save a lot of people. Like there's a lot of stuff you can do now that you can't, like antibiotics, for example. Like back then, if you had a serious injury or accident or you're in a war or whatever it is, you just died of infection. That killed more people than anything else.
Yeah,
And so obviously, like modern medicine has created a bunch of problems. Like MRSA has been created because of modern medicine, but I'm not anti modern medicine. Like that's where I think I differ from a decent amount of people. I think there's a lot of
yeah,
good to come from it.
yeah, and I do too.
But there's this knee jerk reaction where it's, oh, you have a problem? We have something for that.
Mm,
Oh, you have a problem to that? Well, we have something for that. And then
right,
it's just this spiral. And I think that's important for people to not only understand what it is that they're doing, but also understand how everything plays a role in it and make that decision. Do I want to just survive, right? Do I want to survive for
right.
the next 5 or 10 years? And because I've as we get older, people in our lives, grandparents, parents, like you see that firsthand. And I saw
Yeah,
that with both my wife's grandpa and mine, just recently, where it's one of those things that it's hard for me to be sad when they pass because I know how they were living,
yeah,
and I know that like that's tough. And that those are different situations. They were both well into their 80s, but there are a lot of people in your situation where you're not, right? Like I'm still not convinced you're over the age of 45, but you say you
Oh,
are.
you're so sweet. Yeah, my the
So
big
I mean,
the big the big 7-0 is coming up next year.
but I mean 60's
Oh,
not that old, right?
no,
And so
it
to
isn't.
not be able to live your life, like that's tough.
Well, yeah, it is tough. Yeah. It's interesting because I've been thinking about it. Somebody made a comment about, oh, I'm so tired of hearing people say, oh, I look so much younger for my age, which I think I do. But so she got me thinking, and I'm like, what if we have this all wrong? What if I look how you're supposed to look for my age? What if everybody else, not everybody, but what if the majority looks older than what 70 should be?
And that's a huge problem. And that's honestly
Yeah.
why I started my whole page was, so I'm in my mid 30s, right? And without a shadow of a doubt, I can say there's not a single person that I know that is in, okay, there's a couple people, right? But for the most part, once you hit your 30s and you hit your mid 30s and you get married and you have kids, like nobody's in good shape.
No.
Nobody.
And even less, even the younger ones now.
Yeah, and then you get into your 40s and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And we have this obesity epidemic and it's all
Right.
these issues. And yeah, guess what? You put on 30 pounds and you stop exercising and you start eating terribly, you look older.
Well, you do, and your body's older as well. Yeah. And same with the young kids. I mean, I probably could beat half the high schoolers at arm
I know you could.
wrestling.
I know you could. I've seen your
Yeah.
stuff. So
And
how long
that's,
have you,
I laugh, but that's sad.
it's
I mean, it
very
really
sad.
is sad.
And
Yeah.
that's part of what I was hoping is when, like, I want people to understand that, like, you don't have to wait for a life altering event because it's happening earlier and
No.
earlier. Like you hear people are having strokes at 40.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's
Oh,
like,
you don't. And you don't have to go out you don't have to, you don't, this notion, and I hear it all the time, well, this is falling apart, but that's old age. I'm like, no, 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 actually not, it isn't. It's the choices you're making. And that doesn't mean things don't happen. That doesn't mean that I don't, I'm going to physical therapy because my joints are good and that's age. But that doesn't mean that I can't work around it. Might have to be slower on one side, which it is, half the weight, but that isn't a reason to stop.
Yeah, and I tell people all the time. So those issues, like I was on my first anti-inflammatory drug, which ended up being recalled, and there was a lawsuit when I was 12 years old
Wow.
because I had an elbow problem playing baseball. I had my first surgery when I was 16. Then I had one at
Ooh,
19. Then at 21. Then at I think 28. And so people, will ask me like how I feel. Oh, you feel like you're 21 again? I'm like, dude, I felt terrible when I was 21. Like, I mean, like okay, but everything hurt. Like I remember playing, a doubleheader on Sunday and then waking up Monday morning and being like, oh my gosh, like this is brutal. And then you just roll into the athletic training room and you're like, can you just like keep me alive for the next day? Like I got practice
right.
later. And a lot of that is, what we do, the sedentary lifestyle, like sitting a lot and not being
Yeah.
active. But once you figure out that you're not helping yourself with diet, like it's amazing what changes.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that's the big thing. Like some people are advocates for just drop everything, right? Like get everything out of your house that's toxic, get everything out that's food that, basically completely change your life. Where my contention is just start with your food, like just start eating a little bit better and see what happens.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I know people like the other, but just me upping the protein and fat with each meal made a difference that I could connect it. And then that gave me some fuel and motivation. So, I mean, why would I want to go back to eating a plate full of vegetables? And I wasn't big on tofu, but I would, have, veggie burgers and all that. Why would I want to do that when going from that point to having a salad and a steak and feeling better? So it was gradual. It was really easy, and it was easy to make the choices and see the rewards. Now I just skip the salad.
Yeah, and so that's the main thing I'll hear on Twitter, and I bring a lot of it on myself. Like I like to
I
poke
know
a little
you.
bit,
I know you do. I get caught in the crossfires playing with you. Oh, they're tough. What a tough
but I
crowd.
get that. Be like you're scared of vegetables. I'm like no, like that's the big misconception.
Yeah.
Why would I want to eat something that I know is going to make me feel terrible?
Well, and that's the truth. I love Brussels sprouts. There's some vegetables that I like, but they didn't make me feel good. They made me feel sick. So I stay away from them now and just eat the food that makes me feel good. And you get to the point as you start to eliminate these things that you just realize. And then if you try to eliminate and bring them back, it's like, this clearly isn't. Like I love dairy and I'd like to have it once in a while, but it just doesn't work for me. And it may never. Every 6 months I hope, well, maybe I'm healed. I can have a little bit of blue cheese on a burger or a piece of steak, but it just doesn't work. And it just isn't worth it. I don't want to go back to not feeling good. And the thing is if for as sick as I was, and I know if you listen to that podcast, there's probably another 10 other ailments I'm on medication for that are really affecting my life. Not to mention, I had B12 anemia, iron deficiency anemia, a slew of things. If I can heal at my age, then I think basically just about anybody can.
Yeah, that's super true. Like that's not something, like I said, at that age, and again, it's not even that old, but
No,
at
but
that
still,
age
if
and
you don't
those,
come back
yeah, for sure. So what do you eat on a typical?
on a typical day, I'm still fooling around with it, so I'm careful to label myself. And I'm not, as what I am, because I'm not a true carnivore, right? I think a carnivore is somebody I don't know, that just eats the beef, and it's a good bit. I'm switching because I'm working on my immune system, and I'm working on this cold therapy that I'm been preparing for. So, and I do feel I do feel good having wild seafood. So I'm probably 50 beef, 50 wild seafood, fresh butter. My homemade kimchi, which I make, is really about the only vegetable I have. I might occasionally have a few mushrooms. Mushrooms don't bother me. I'm not a diehard. I like rosemary. Rosemary and thyme doesn't bother me. I do stay away from any nightshade, anything with lectins, any oxalates. I really stay away. So I get my meat from regenerative farms, sources I trust, bone broth. Coming down with a little bit of cold, I'll have chicken soup. There'll be a few carrots in there, occasionally a few onions. So it's really a basic diet. You know, if you open up, I've got a lot of meat brining in my refrigerator, and I have eggs. I usually will have so I keep it really basic. I don't drink. I don't eat sugar unless I brine blueberries in the summertime. Sugar is just not, sugar and I just don't mix. And so it's really basic. I'm not a true carnivore. I'm not going to eat a steak every day. I like other cuts of meat. I do love a burger. I loved your smash burgers, and the one you made today looked really good. Whatever that burger was. Uh,
Uh, Fried cheese curd on
yeah.
top of a
Oh,
burger.
yeah. I mean, that
Uh,
sounds really good, but I'll pay for it for a couple of days. I
yeah.
just could feel it in my joints. And I've tried sheep, goat. I've tried from raw dairies, local. And that doesn't mean somebody else can't. I think the fact that I was sick for so long and all that, there's some things that I just can't go back and maybe do. So it's a really basic diet. At this point, I know what aggravates me. And if I'm going to have it, I'm going to pay for it. And I know I'm going to pay for it. And normally I decide, you know, if I got to Santa Fe, I love their food. I might have something spicy, but the chilies, you know, my hands will swell the next day. And I might make a choice to do that if I'm traveling, but day to day, I keep it really simple.
Yeah, and I think that's super important because that's what my advocate for the carnivore diet is. I'm not super hardcore carnivore either. Like I use some spices, I use some herbs. Every once in
Yeah.
a while I'll mix some other stuff in. But to me, and what I think the actual like the core of carnivore is the elimination part.
I
It's
agree.
eliminate that diet down to the point where you know you feel good, and then you start to understand how foods make you feel.
Yeah.
And there doesn't necessarily have to be a perfect explanation for it. I can tell you right now that uh, I can do kefir, whether it's raw or not.
Oh, I love
I
it. And I wish I could.
I can do that, and I can do raw milk, and I can do most cheeses. But I start adding in Greek yogurt.
Okay.
I have there's a goat's milk Greek yogurt that I've played around with a little bit, but it's pretty expensive. But if I just get your standard Greek yogurt, like I know I'm not going to feel good, or I'm going to break out, or something
Yeah.
like that's going to happen. And are they all dairy? Yeah. Like why does one? I don't know. Like I'm not trying to get into the microbiology
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
But after a while, you start figuring it out, and I
Yeah.
know that I can eat onions, and I'm probably going to feel a little bloated. I'm probably not going to have any issue after that. But again,
Right.
that's a choice. And I go, do I really want to have this? Like, is it worth it? And most of the time,
Yeah.
it's not, right?
Right. Right. Most of the time it isn't. And sometimes it is. But
Yeah,
most
so
of the
I've
time
gone
I
to the
say
point
no.
where I will use them in an application. Like I just did oxtail, braised oxtail,
Oh, nice.
and I did onions in the broth. I didn't eat the onions, but the onions are in the broth,
Right.
and I'm okay, right? I might
Yeah.
bloat just a tiny bit, but
Right.
that's okay. Like that's worth it to me. And that's part of why I cook the way I do, and I use thyme and rosemary and garlic and onion powder and all that kind of stuff because I think too many people see this diet and they're like, okay, the only way I can do what you did is if I just eat beef, salt, and water, right? And that's all I can
Yeah.
eat, and that sounds miserable. I'm like, well, yeah, for a
It
lot of people
does.
it is miserable, so don't
Yeah.
do that. Like,
Yeah. Well, I got well on keto,
Yeah.
and so I'm going back and upping me. I'm going back and upping my fat again. So, and it was clean keto that I got well on, and I started carnivore in January, and it was good. I just feel that I just do better when my fat's higher than my protein,
Yeah. And I think that's a,
personally.
yeah,
So
no, that's a fair point for sure.
I
Um,
just do. I think my workouts, my energy level, everything, I feel better. So I'm going to go. Make sure that my fat's higher than my, and I eat a lot of protein. I at least, because I work out hard. I work out 4 times a week, and we work for somebody my age. I work out hard, and I work out harder than a lot that are 20 years younger than me. But I do an awful
yeah.
lot, and so I get 1 to 1.2 grams, for my body weight with protein.
Yeah.
But I do feel I'm better on the fat, so I am working more to get into ketosis. It's just a good marker for me.
Yeah. I think it's hard if you're doing carnivore. I think it's hard to have higher protein than fat. I know some people do. So mine, I actually try to keep my grams similar. So my grams of fat and my grams of protein are pretty close,
Both.
but that means my calories from fat are coming quite a bit more, right?
Right.
Um, so and honestly, like, I don't really count that much. Like,
Well, I
I've done it
don't
for so
either. I
many.
just can tell.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like people are like, oh,
But
you count calories, and I'm like, well, I can tell you how much it is. Like I can, like that's
yeah,
just secondhand nature to me right now.
right, right. Well, if you keep it simple and basic, and you know that this meal is in this realm, well, it's going to be that way the next time. I
Yeah,
don't have. I might have a variety with the cuts of meat, but my menu is basically the same. And I was pretty much 50-50 with the fat protein. I'm just up and just making sure. So I'm throwing in an avocado.
hmm.
So there, which I know the carnivores will be like, no.
Oh,
But
I've trust me, I've got a couple recipes with avocados. I eat them from time
okay,
to time.
good. And they don't bother me. And I'm trying to just get my fat up a little bit. So I'm throwing one in every once in a while, and we'll just see. So I'm still playing with it.
I think
Yeah.
that's the important part right there is you know what's helped you heal.
Yes.
You know what makes you feel bad. And it's just this continual, like, trying to perfect this never, like, always
Right.
changing, never stable thing. And that's, like, I think that's huge for people because 99% of people have no idea how something makes them feel.
Well,
Like,
you're right, and I do think the point you made earlier is the most important part of this is what I eliminated. I mean, I eat good food, but I eliminated a lot that was aggravating me. And I found as I was eliminating, I would hit another group, and it's like I'm eliminating these, and I feel better, and I just
have,
keep.
have you had any backlash is the wrong word, but have you had any people look at you like, wait, you're doing what? Like, you're eating what? How does, that's not
Yeah,
right.
it's been tough, which is why Twitter's been so wonderful for me because my family has been so loving and supportive, and I adore them. But they're kind of like, enough's enough. And I'm like, well, you don't understand how enough's enough to you because I'm well, but this is why I'm well. And I'm not going to go back to what made me sick.
Yeah.
And I think for some of them, that they don't have that connection. Like, and that's a lot of people who try to lose weight in general. Okay, well, I lost the weight. Now I can go back to eating the garbage. No, you can't. You're going to
Yeah.
go back. So why would I go back to eating the vegetables or whatever else I ate that made me sick? So it's been hard as they kind of think, oh, I've gotten carried away. Why are you weight training 4 times a week? I mean, you're going to be 70. And so that's been hard. I don't even discuss it with my friends. People uh, some, other people that I know that they just think I'm some oddball that I train as much as I do. And some have asked, well, what do you eat? And I'm just not going to say it anymore because they just look at me like I have four heads.
And that's so
It,
crazy to me. Like,
isn't it?
and that's the culture that's unfortunately like magnified, and you get it tenfold on Twitter. It's well, that's anecdotal evidence. Why, like, you can't base that off of that. Like, studies say,
Okay.
yeah, right. Studies say that what you're doing is wrong, right? Like,
Oh yeah,
I can go on PubMed and find 100 studies that say everything that you're doing right now is wrong. Yet we know where you've been, like
right.
literally on like the path to, okay, let's start making like final arrangements, right?
Oh yeah, my family was already thinking about and already discussing. Maybe in a couple of years we're going to have to put you in a home, and I'm thinking I'm not going to make it. And I don't believe if I continued, I would be here. I mean, I really was. Everything was crumbling. I can think of very few specialists I didn't have on my team that were piling medications on me. I don't think, yeah. And like said before, 100 doctors would tell me I made a mistake getting off the antibiotics. So there's tons of evidence that I did, but I'm doing pretty well.
Yeah, right. Like, I would say so.
You know, yeah. And a lot of doctors look at me and say, you can't, they want, because my cholesterol is higher now, but my triglycerides are 56. My ratio is 57.
Yeah,
I mean, those are stellar, killer, good numbers.
yeah.
So I'm not worried about my cholesterol whole. And they're just like, you're killing yourself. And I'm like, I
Well,
don't think so.
like, and that's the thing. Like, there are doctors, I can think of a couple off the top of my head,
Yeah,
that will tell you that, right? Especially on
yeah,
Twitter, and they tell it to hundreds of thousands of people that follow them. And so, what I'm now led to believe is what they want me to believe is that even though you went from where you were to where you are now,
right.
what you are doing is killing yourself.
Yes,
And
and they
that,
wouldn't.
like,
They don't even want. And I've only had one, my Parkinson's, that took notes and wanted to hear more about my fat and my other. The rest of them, they literally couldn't get me out of the room quick enough. They did not want to hear it. They changed the subject. I'm walking in with a walker, fading away, and then I come in like this, and they don't want to hear it. And I'm actually flabbergasted. Where's the curiosity?
yeah, and that's so I don't know if you know much about Sean Baker or read
Yeah,
any of his stuff. But that's essentially what he did is he started questioning it. He's like, wait a minute, like I'm telling people to do these just simple things like eat more fat and like reduce the carbs and like stop eating the processed, and people are getting better and they're on
yeah.
less medication, and I'm doing less surgeries and like all of this stuff. And it led to him getting his medical license revoked. And that's
Oh, I
something
didn't
that people
realize
love.
that.
Yeah, like he went through this whole process, and I couldn't tell you off the top of my head where it ended, but there was a long stretch of time where they revoked his medical license while he was under review, because he was telling people to do these things and they were getting better. And that's unfortunately that's
It is,
where
but
we're at.
we're brainwashed, just like my family who well, can I get groceries for you? I said, yeah, you know, buy 5 pounds of ground beef, get me 2 dozen eggs, a thing of sugar-free bacon, a jar of this kind of I make my own, but when I go away, you can go Whole Foods and get this kind of kimchi for me, and I'm good. Wait, that's all you want? I'm like, yeah, that'll do it for the week. And they look at me like, you got to be kidding. You're eating all this meat? I'm like, yeah, you're looking at me right now. I'm alive and well in front of you. So you bet I'm going to keep doing it.
But if you told them, I want some Wonder Bread, I want a thing of peanut butter, I want 2 packages of Oreos, and I want
Yeah.
a couple frozen pizzas, they'd be like, oh, sure, there's a coupon for it. That's great.
They wouldn't think anything. They would. Now my family's good eaters, so it won't be that bad, but it's like, wait, you're not having the pizza?
Yeah.
You know, no, I'm not having the pizza. And it is a shame that we've become brainwashed. And most people aren't getting the connection. And the fact that they can see people who saw where I was and see where I am now still aren't getting the connection, it's a little discouraging.
Well, that's the absolute crazy one to me is one of the posts and somebody that I'll have on later in the show when he gets some things situated. Ahmad, who lost 200 plus pounds while with cerebral palsy in a wheelchair by doing just those choices.
Yeah.
And people can see all these things and they still question it, right?
Yeah.
You don't even have to do it. You don't even have to
Yeah.
partake or necessarily believe, but to tell people the opposite it's crazy to me. So lastly, before I let you go, because I could probably talk to you for 4 hours on here.
We probably could.
What would be your advice for somebody who has not hit their low point, breaking point? Because I feel like that's when somebody finally hits that, that's easy to like start up. Well, I don't have anything to lose. So somebody who has not hit that, what would be your advice on just some things that they can change?
For me, and I say my 10-step story is the most important because that started me on a not only moving, but a journey of consistency of doing the 10 steps every day. I'm not a big one on waiting for motivation. It's like, do it. Who cares whether you're motivated? And I have times where I'm not motivated to get up and get moving. And it doesn't really matter. I just do it. So to me, motivations, and a lot of people say, well, I'm waiting to get motivated. Well, just forget that. Just do it. And so for me, the consistency every day was the real builder. So building that with the walking 10 steps, which brought me some pleasure because I like being outside and I could move and I hurt less. And then I just changed my diet by just adding the more fat and the protein, eliminating some of the carbs, and I started to get better, and it just fueled itself. But you can't just go. I just don't believe that you can do it like 3 times a week. It's a real lifestyle change. It's a real mental shift. It's thinking food is fuel, and I get a lot of pleasure. I love to cook, and I get pleasure out of that. But it's just shift. This is fuel for my body. But the consistency, hands down, for me was the key. And I also stuck with that eating plan for 1.5 years without going off of avoiding gluten, sugar, any things that I knew were, and we all know at this point they're all culprits. I mean, we're really lying to ourselves if we say, well, they're not. But consistency, hands down, was the key. And I still stay with that, doing something every day. And then one other thing is I have a plan. I put in my workout, the first thing that goes in my calendar, and my calendar is made about 3 months ahead of time, is my workouts. When I meet with my trainer, and then after that comes everything else, and I don't cancel. So even if you're not working with a trainer, and the only reason I do, and I won't keep you, I work with a trainer because I don't know when to stop. I just keep going. And so I hire somebody so she can say, wait, we're stopping right now. You're not doing it anymore. I'm like, no, let me do this reps better. But having that consistency, having the calendar, making it a priority in my health and my life, and doing it every single day and thinking about every choice that I make every day, the rest all falls into place.
Well, I can tell you, whether you know this or not, you are an inspiration to thousands of people. I love all of your content on Twitter. Let me.
Thank you.
Are you just Mimi Morgan on?
Mimi K. Morgan.
Mimi K. Morgan on Twitter, X, whatever people call it these days.
Yeah.
If you guys have that, I would highly, 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 highly recommend giving her a follow. Yeah, I love all your stuff. I really appreciate you being on here.
You're one of my favorites, so thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, if you guys have any further questions, want to see any more information, go follow Mimi on Twitter, Mimi K. Morgan. It has been a pleasure, and I will see all you guys next time.